All right, so we're going to celebrate the 3 best films that we've seen so far this year. And to further prove that we are pretentious film critic jerks, we are allowed to pick things that we have seen that you guys have not. To sort of boost our morale and talk about how cool we are. To that end, so all of us will do number 3, then all of us will do number 2, and then we'll all finish with our number 1s. I'm going to start by telling you, and we're not going to go into in-depth detail with these because they're movies that we've talked about, but I'm going to mention Quiet Place 2. Quiet Place 2 is one of the last films that we saw before everything went into quarantine. I actually did see The Hunt afterwards, so it's not the very last one. It is the last junket that we were able to do together. We were all up in New York City. We still have
that interview we haven't published yet.
John Krasinski interview banked.
I keep forgetting that we have. It's a great interview. I keep forgetting that we have that.
It's also so weird. Think about how weird that whole day was, because that was where we first started to get into the hey, don't shake his hand.
Yeah.
The tepidness about quarantine.
I remember there was the weird, like, do we get a picture? Like, is it going to be weird if we because my picture with him is like kind of like because normally I'm a very like hold on, broke my like a squeezing kind of and in my picture I'm just kind of like leaning in close to him because you're right, those like the first steps.
It's a really good interview, and one of the reasons why I love that interview is he tells the story about a scene that you should go back and rewatch right now because it's in the trailer, which is the truck coming at Emily Blunt. And one of the things that we've had a great conversation with, especially in the one that we just did for the Vast of Night, of how you just put things together on the day. And he talks about building that scene, and he talks about the stunt coordinators and the safety protocol people on the set assuring him that it was going to be okay, but them still saying like, "Are we really going to do this?" kind of thing.
Also, it's also his wife, and it's in that vehicle too.
And kids, and they're real kids whose families let them go into that car. And that's a scene you can watch in the trailer. This isn't a big spoiler. I love Quiet Place 2 because it found a way back into that world. It didn't feel like we're just going to move the story along because the first one did really well. It explores really interesting places. It has a really great performance by Cillian Murphy. And some really interesting twists and turns of where they go in exploring some of these new characters. So I'm putting that at number 3. Right now, it's down for a September, first weekend of September release, providing everything holds. So hopefully we will be able to see Quiet Place 2 soon. Kev, what's your number 3?
All right, my number 3. Before I say my number 3, Jake, I feel like I already know your number 1 because you texted about it. I have not seen that one yet, so don't go too plot-wise.
Oh, fair.
Because I'm watching it right after the show. All right.
Beautiful.
Number 3 is Defy Bloods.
Nice.
And I think a lot of that has to do with just, I think Spike Lee kind of blended together 2 of my favorite things about storytelling: emotion and technical aspects of filmmaking. And he utilized aspects of filmmaking with like aspect ratios and film stock and different types of film to create a world of immersion for the audience. And I also love that Spike Lee trusts his audience. A lot of filmmakers and studios and movies don't really think their audiences are smart sometimes, I find. And there's a lot of exposition and a lot of over-explaining in movies, and a lot of it can be done through visual and different ways. And the idea of having the current actors play their Vietnam flashbacks in their current ages was something I just found truly incredible, but it did confuse people. People were like, what's going on here? And I feel like that was such an interesting thing because it allowed the audience essentially to collaborate with Spike Lee. You kind of became, you worked with them. I get that. And then the message about PTSD and how no matter how old you get, when you relive those memories, you're still reliving them in your current body. And that's kind of the concept. And also the de-aging, I think, wouldn't have worked. I still have trouble with the de-aging in Irishman personally. But I think that Defy Bloods is just, it's outstanding filmmaking. Delroy Lindo is amazing. I don't find the film to be perfect. There are faults to it. I feel like, there are storylines that don't necessarily play out as much as I wanted them to. It feels a little uneven at times. But that unevenness kind of like kept me on edge. It kind of kept me I was in it the whole time. Like it always kept me on my toes. And so that's why I thought that film was so interesting. You know why? Because it was so unique. I never seen a movie like that before, ever. I mean, that guy takes risks. I mean, you watch Do the Right Thing, 25th Hour. That guy is operating in a very different headspace as a filmmaker. And I like that he allows his audience to be a collaborator with him and be smart with them and go on that journey. So that's why it's my number 3.
I've had 2 people tell me they had to turn that movie off halfway through because emotionally it was too much. It was too much for them.
Interesting.
2 different people have told me that. And I asked them the scene, and they were 2 different scenes that they bailed out on, where they just said, I can't. It's too... But what I admire about Spike is that he's just going to make the movie. It's unapologetic. Yeah. And if it's really timely, and if it's commenting on things that make you uncomfortable, that's almost the point. That's almost the point. So, Jakey, number 3.
My number 3 is The Vast of Night. I love the simplicity of it. You know, it's a story that we've seen 1,000 times before, but also not ever seen from a perspective unlike anything we've ever seen. There are so many different layers to it, you know, that I like. I think I'm very excited about this director and sort of seeing what he is able to do next. I promise, like, whenever his name pops up on whatever next movie he told us that he's working on, I'm going to be very intrigued. There are a lot of technical aspects that made me go like, oh, that's interesting. And then also I loved a lot of like the low key themes, this idea of listening to voices that you've never listened to before. And it's easy on the surface to, and we talked to him about this, you know, it's easy on the surface to say like that we're specifically talking about aliens, but more so that like the 2 prominent people who had something to say in the film were a black man and an elderly woman in the 1950s in the South. And I just really thought that was such a fantastic perspective to put in there. Loved the performances from the 2 leads. For me, a huge X factor in terms of my favorite movies of the year is how much I'm thinking about them after it's done. There are a lot of movies this year that I saw instantly was like, oh my God, that was great. And then within a week, sort of was like, yeah, I'm not really thinking much about this. This was a slow burn for me. Like when it was over, I really dug it. I was like, oh, I really enjoyed that. But I think I'm like almost a month out from having seen it, and I still think about it at least once a day. So really dug Vast of Night. Was very excited to have the director on our podcast. And so yeah, that's my number 3.
My number 2 is a movie that's coming out this Friday. It's called Irresistible. I love this movie, and it blew me away how much I enjoyed it, because I went into it thinking it's going to be heavy-handed political commentary. And I was just reminded of how smart Jon Stewart is when he's tackling politics and analyzing the media. And I thought it was really, it pulls no punches and goes after both sides. It goes after the media and how they're enabling so much of this. And I enjoyed it the first time through because Steve Carell is fantastic, playing the type of role that Steve Carell is the best at, which is somebody who is really a jerk under the surface, but you still kind of like him for some reason. It's a little bit of Michael Scott. I didn't watch any of Space Force, but I think he kind of plays that role in Space Force. He's a Democratic strategist, political strategist, who is following up the Hillary Clinton loss in 2016. Like, it takes place in our world, and it's the Democrats trying to come to terms with how on earth did we blow this. So they're trying to find their way forward, and he zeroes in on a candidate played by Chris Cooper in a tiny mayoral race in Wisconsin. And Carell's like, if I can groom this guy, I'll kind of get my mojo back. And then, of course, it balloons into a much bigger political race. But it's told through the lens of Jon Stewart, who wrote the screenplay and directed it. It has a few twists and turns I did not see coming. And I was able to go back and see it a second time. And it's one of those movies where it's a completely different movie the second time through. It's smarter. It's funnier. And like Jake said, it's one of those movies that I just have thought about nonstop since I watched it. And I was really impressed with it. I'm a huge Jon Stewart fan. I loved what he did on The Daily Show. I hate that the machine of The Daily Show burned him out. I think he just got really fed up with the endless BS that comes with that beat. Obviously, the redundancy and the lies and everything that comes with politics and the media in our world nowadays. And so he just was like, F it, I'm going to go live on a farm in New Jersey. And God bless him. But I'm glad that he came back with this story, because I thought it was it's really, really well done for this time. And I think people need to check it out on VOD. We were going to review it in a little bit, but I just did. So
I have a question for you. So I have seen so many negative reviews of that movie. I would say almost I would say almost universally negative. So I was curious why you think okay, wait, I didn't know you didn't know that.
That's fascinating. No, I wanted to. I know the embargo broke recently, and Eric Eisenberg is doing the review for CinemaBlend, and he only gave it 3 stars out of 5. I gave it 4.5, but I didn't do the review for the site. But I was curious how it was going to play with people. I'm going to go back and read all the reviews now, because I'm curious what people's takeaway is. From a Kev, you saw it. Did you like it as much as I did, or are you kind of lukewarm?
I was lukewarm on it.
That's
personally.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it's so funny because I love Jon Stewart. I actually thought Rosewater was very good. I thought Rosewater was a fantastic film. But again, I have only saw that movie once, and I liked it when I saw it. I had to revisit it to know if I still like it. But one thing I do like about what he does in this film is he brought back a very old school. This is super nerdy, but he brought back a very old school aspect ratio. Did you notice when you watched it, there were black bars on the left and right side of the screen?
No, I didn't even notice.
It's literally like a old school ratio called 1:6:6. It was the same ratio this movie called The Great McGinty was shot in. So he was using that ratio along with themes from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington to kind of, and those aspects and that type of storytelling and those types of ideas I thought were interesting as from a filmmaking perspective. I found the characters just to be I just didn't find them memorable. Okay. And I think the concept is funny. I mean, there's a really random scene, which is actually in the trailer, where Rose Byrne licks Steve Carell's face, which I don't know if you asked them about this, Sean, but that was her first day on set. And it was the first time she ever met Steve Carell. So like, she's like, there's a scene, Jake, where she literally just licks his face. And it's like, and I found that it was funny, but it took me out of the film for a second. I just found the comedy didn't blend so well, I thought, with the politics in the sense of, I think Stewart's one of the smartest people on the planet. I just didn't find the storytelling to be as engaging as I wanted it to be. I think performance-wise, like there's a great bit where like they're both on TV together at one point, and like Carell walks over to her shot, and there's like some funny stuff in there that really kind of plays into the media aspect of it. I won't go into more detail. I thought the ending was a little strange.
Interesting. Okay.
But I won't go into detail. But I think a 3 is probably a fair rating for it. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I thought it was just fine.
Jake, I want you to check it out and break the tie. Okay. I would love to hear what your take on it. There's a very funny bit where Carell's character is always doing something really raunchy. Like he's constantly in a battle with Rose Byrne's character, and he'll make really sexual like overtones about like how they're trying to get up on each other, like power. And every time he does it, an old woman from the town walks in front of him, and she always just happens to be there. Her name is Dot, and Carell always has to go, I'm sorry, Dot. I'm so sorry. Like you shouldn't have seen that kind of thing. And it just keeps escalating.
That's funny.
It happens multiple times.
That part was funny. There's some really good stuff in there.
Some funny stuff.
I think a lot of it, and again, this is maybe just my ignorance in regards to politics. I mean, I know. I feel like I know general politics, right? But this movie goes really deep into some things that I wasn't fully aware of. So I felt like personally some stuff went over my head. And so I guess I'm not trying to sound like I'm stupid, but I guess my point would be if you watch this film and you're not a big political person, some of this stuff might fly over your head a little bit. I'm
excited to read the reviews now because I wasn't sure I was going to play, and I really liked it, so I'm curious how it plays. All right,
why is it called Irresistible?
I honestly think, and I wanted to ask him this in the thing, I think it's just because the word resist is in the middle.
Right. Well, I mean, there's one point in the film where they do show like the title and then they read out resist. Yeah. But why call it irresistible?
Well, I think you're looking for a candidate who would be irresistible on the national stage, right? You're looking for someone who plays to both sides. You're talking about how they put on a facade to almost make themselves look irresistible to people. I mean, it's all about image in a campaign, right? And they talk a lot about, there's a point where the townsfolk are upset because they back Chris Cooper's character, and Steve Carell comes in and is pouring all this money into his campaign. And then the mayor, the incumbent who he's running against, retaliates with an ad and sets up a campaign office in town. And the town who's working for Chris Cooper gets very discouraged. And Steve Carell says, wait a second, you mean to tell me that the incumbent ran a political ad and he set up a campaign office? Like, and the way he says it to them is just like, well, of course, like this is how it's done, sort of thing. Yeah. But they're so new to it, they've never seen any of this. And I think it's him telling them, like, it's all about image, it's all about what we put forward, and it's never about the strength of the candidate, which I think is really scary and terrifying as we approach a national election.
Sean, did you feel? I didn't feel like Jon Stewart's voice came through the movie.
See, but I think it did, if only because, and especially on the rewatch, there's a lot of stuff that the second, like when it starts with Rose Byrne and Steve Carell essentially talking to the media and saying, they have these, both of them have these amazing speeches that are cut back and forth where they say to the news media, hey, we're lying to you. You know that we're lying to you. Everything that we're saying to you right now is not true. And you're not going to call us on it, you know? And they go back and forth with this for a little while. And then at the end they say, okay, I'll see you at the bar, you know, in 5 minutes, which goes to show that the politicians and the news media are all in the same bed. And I think so much of that, like, then when they talk about the, and this is getting really into this movie, and you guys just watch it. But there's a shot where they announce the results of the 2016 election, and they just cut to an image that I only know as the cover of a Van Halen album, which is a fat guy standing in front of a cannon, and he's getting a cannonball right to the gut, right? And I don't know why Van Halen chose that as the cover of their Van Halen 3 album. It's the one that has Gary Sharon from Extreme as their singer. But that was Jon Stewart saying that's what it felt like. It felt like you got a cannonball to the gut when everybody sort of believed that Hillary was going to win the election, and then Trump ends up winning. So
and what Sean is saying, which is important, just to give some context, is basically, like, as he said, like, this is rooted in reality. So, like, Rose Byrne's character worked on the Trump campaign, and Steve Carell worked on the Clinton campaign. And so what's interesting about the film, what I found interesting though, is that he wanted to groom essentially a conservative type of person, Chris Cooper's character, I think that's what they were going for, into more of a Democratic candidate to win over the conservative votes, to win that. So that, it's a cool concept. It actually makes sense. I just
so all of those insights, I found that to be Jon Stewart-y, you know,
interesting.
Like that take on that world, I found to be his voice kind of thing. Yeah. So, Kev, your number 2.
My number 2 is Bad Boys 3. And I was just like, and the reason I went with it is because I love that franchise, and it delivered. It delivered for me. I loved Bad Boys 3, and I rewatched it the other day. And that film, by the way, takes so many risks. I have to tell you, when they shoot Mike Lowry in that sequence on the motorcycle, that was a genuinely, like, gasping moment as a fan. Yep. And we're like, 20, 30 minutes into the movie, he's been shot visibly 3 times in his chest. Like, he's gonna die, it looks like. And, like, there was a part of me where I was like, I don't want Mike to be gone. Like, I just love this franchise. And I feel like these filmmakers who stepped in really, really made their own movie, but still kept Bay's style, but they still made their own movie. They didn't copy Michael Bay. I mean, they let Michael Bay direct his own scene. If you missed our interview with the directors,
such
Sean
a great
and I
scene.
talked to them. Yeah, and Michael Bay directs his own, like, circle shot. It's cool. But in general, I thought Bad Boys 3 was a pretty risky film. It's actually super. Lauren and I were discussing this the other day. It's one of the most violent movies I've ever seen, and it's genuinely violent. And I'm not using that as a way to say it's good, but that movie is hardcore. And, like, Pantoliano's character dying off, like, that was a gigantic loss, like, for me as a fan of the franchise. So I just feel like the weight of that film, it could have been a cash grab, and I felt like everybody brought their A game. Like, Will Smith became Mike Lowry again, and we've all interviewed Will Smith. Will Smith is nothing like Mike Lowry in real life, nothing like him whatsoever. And I find it interesting that he embodies Mike so interestingly. But for me, Bad Boys 3, as a fan of those films, and Bad Boys 2 being one of my favorite action movies of all time, that movie delivered, and I loved it. I've seen it multiple times. It's not perfect, but as a fan, it's my number 2 of the year.
That's awesome. Jakey?
That's cool. My number 2 is The Lodge.
Really?
I love that movie. I love how much I was surprised by it. I can't tell you how many times, like, I'd hit a beat and just go, what in the hell is going on? I love that the ending is not what I expected in the best way possible. I thought there were some killer performances, but I was just so unsettled the entire time. And it's such a great example of, like, cinematic misdirection, where it throws some facts at you and some things about certain characters at you at the beginning to just almost, like, in such a subtle way, but, like, to almost trick you into thinking that you have it figured out. And because you'll think, like, oh, I remember I was told that, and I guarantee that's going to come back into play at the end. And it just doesn't do what it sets you up to make you think it's going to do without. I feel like it doesn't make sense if you haven't seen the movie. I'm trying not to give it away.
Yeah.
But I just thought, like, it was just so unnerving, and, like, when it ended, it just left me going, like, I just needed, like, not a gross, but I just needed to, like, shake it off, like, So I mean, we talk about like everlasting effects on movies. I just thought it was absolutely incredible.
So that's on Hulu right now, right?
Yes.
Bad Boys for Life and Irresistible are both paid VOD, and The Five Bloods is on Netflix. I just want to let everybody know this is great.
Yeah. And The Vast of Night is on Amazon.
Vast of Night's on Amazon. You can go and watch all of these right now. That's fantastic that we're, in a weird sort of way, these movies are readily available. Yeah. My number one so far is The Five Bloods, for most of the reasons that Kevin said. I just think it's... But here's what I find really interesting. I gave The Five Bloods 5 stars. And I honestly do think it's one of Spike's strongest films. But I don't know when we get to the end of the year if it's going to be my number one, right? Because I agree with Kevin, it has some flaws, but it was so emotionally gut-punching. But when we do a top 10, I think we sort of build favorite. And I had this problem last year with Endgame and Irishman. I respected Irishman and was so blown away by what it accomplished. And I put it as my number one. But if you asked me now, do I like Endgame more than Irishman? I probably like Endgame more than Irishman. And that's going to play in the back of my mind when I start to put together a list at the end of the year. The Five Bloods blew me away, and I was so moved by everything that Spike did. But do I love it? Is it a movie that I'm going to throw on multiple times as we talk about Warm Blanket Blend? It's not that kind of movie. It's confrontational. It gets in your face. It raises really uncomfortable conversations. I think they're really important to have, and I'm glad that he's doing it, but I wonder how I'll feel at the end of the year. But for right now, currently, it is the best film that I've seen, and honestly, if you have Netflix, you should be checking it out. So that's my number one. Kev?
My number one, I feel like Invisible Man is the best thing I've seen this year so far.
Nice.
Just from a filmmaking perspective, I just really respect Lee Winnell. He's like one of us. He was like a reviewer, he loves movies and, broke out with the Saw franchise with James Wan. I just feel like Upgrade is such an incredible action film, and then to deliver the Upgrade style into an Invisible Man film that also spoke to domestic violence and also spoke to so many important themes. But also what made Invisible Man so scary was that it wasn't so far from reality. Like the science of what you would have to do to create an invisible man with like reflections of cameras and lenses and, while it is extreme and probably would never work the way it does in the film, we're not far off from that technology being something we could play with. And I think that at the end of the day, to have someone in your house that you can't see but in a non-sci-fi way, he's not liquid metal. It feels grounded. It makes it that much more terrifying. And I still think that kitchen scene is a work of art. I mean, the way they filmed that, choreographed that sequence, that wonder with Elizabeth Moss being thrown around the kitchen is just incredible filmmaking. And I'll never forget, I interviewed Aldous Hodge recently for the Blu-ray release. There's a scene in that film where Aldous Hodge is on the ground getting beaten up by the Invisible Man. And he basically did all that himself, physically like lifted himself in the air, threw himself back.
Oh my God.
He said it was all core work. He was like lifting himself like up, and like flying back. I was like, dude, wow. I could not believe that they did it like that. And I remember, I'll never forget the trailer when she pours the paint. I'm like, Why did they ruin that? But that scene still plays
it
so
still
hard.
Plays, man.
In
it
the
still
movie.
Plays.
It's terrifying. I still think one of the greatest crowd reaction. We should do crowd reaction blend one day.
That'd be a fun one.
That's a good one.
Because one of my favorite crowd reactions ever was that restaurant scene when her sister gets killed.
Oh my God, that's a great one.
Like people just jumped, like freaked out. I hadn't seen people get that like crazy in a movie theater. And this is a random one. I've mentioned it before, but Breaking Dawn Part 2 was one of my favorite theater experiences ever, Twilight, because they did this twist in the film where people didn't know their favorite characters were not actually dead. And I just love listening to people in the audience like getting angry or upset. And so we should do crowd reaction blend. That'd be fun.
And also throw back to an old interview. Please listen to Jake talking to Bill Condon about that scene, because we have an interview with Bill Condon. And that's Jake got into that conversation with him.
Twists ever in the history.
Great.
It was so satisfying.
Jake, it's
never
great.
Forget it.
I hate those movies so much.
It's so great.
It was an awesome twist.
No crowd reaction will ever beat, though, Cap catching it and saying, "Assemble." And that's it. That's
Let me
the
ask
whole.
You this.
There's no crowd reaction.
So funny. I prefer the dead silent, like opening night, because I'd already seen it, so I knew what was coming. Yeah. But I went back opening night of Infinity War, and the dead silence as a 400 packed theater walked out after, like, you know, when Cap says, "Oh my God," when you realize what's happened, and it cuts to black, and you realize, like, I've never seen the silence that people walked out, and no, like there was just like a, what the hell? Like, to me, that is more powerful than people screaming like, "Oh, that's a really cool moment." Like, to me, when you can make 400 people shut the hell up, that's awesome.
What's it like being wrong?
Sean, I'd argue that the moment when Thor enters Wakanda is more powerful from an audience perspective. I mean, Avengers Assemble was a big deal, but I think the Thor entrance into Wakanda made me the most excited. You're asking me to
choose between PJ or Brendan, and I can't do it. I can't. It's impossible. Actually, I think On Your Left is even stronger than Assemble, but I will never. Here's the thing. I sat next to Adam Frazier, a very close friend of mine, in Atlanta, where we had to drive down to Atlanta to see Endgame. And I will never forget that in the moment between when Chris Evans says, "Avengers!" and then Adam sat next to me and he said, "He's going to say it." And then he said, "Assemble." And our theater screamed. And I will always hear Adam's voice in between those two. Adam goes, and he wasn't talking to me. He was just talking out loud. And he just said, "He's going to say it." And then he said it. And it was because, remember, Whedon cut him off at the end of Age of Ultron? Yeah. And the gag has been, he's never been able to say it up to this point. And he finally got to say it. It was great.
That's awesome.
Where are we? Number one? Jake, number one.
Yeah. My number one is a movie that's not out yet, but it's a little movie called Palm Springs.
Nice.
I was texting you guys as I progressively fell more and more in love. Like, remember, I don't know if you guys remember, like, I was watching it on a Friday night, and at first I was like, guys, I'm watching this movie, and like, I'm really digging it. And then, I was, and here's the deal. I want to express how much I love this movie without saying anything.
Yeah, you can't.
If you can, if it's possible, because I was fortunate enough to have this happen to me.
I know nothing about it.
Yes, that's perfect. Watch it without knowing what it's about. The trailer ruins the bit. Unfortunately, I feel like, Kevin, without giving too much away, I feel like at the junket on Thursday, like when we talk to the cast, we're going to have to talk about what it's about. Like, you can't, like, otherwise there's not really much to talk about. Yeah. And so I feel bad that I'm like going to eventually have to ruin it for people.
Well, here's the thing. I'll say this.
I don't know what it's about, so be careful.
Yeah, no. Knowledge of the bit doesn't ruin the movie.
No, you're right, but like that there's whenever you watch it, and Sean, you know what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. There's maybe a 60-second moment where you sort of go, "Wait, what the hell is this movie about?"
Yeah.
Because it takes you in one direction, and then there's 60 seconds where you go, "Wait, what?" Mm-hmm. And then from that point on, you know what it's about. Idea. Like you get the bit. But the joy of that 60 seconds where I just didn't know what it was about was such a unique thrill that I haven't felt in a long time, just because we so often we get advanced knowledge about things and we watch trailers. Like I haven't allowed myself to be surprised by a movie, but beyond that, I just thought it was so clever. I thought the screenplay was so smart. I laughed out loud from start to finish. I thought, like, I'm like hot and cold on Andy Samberg. There are sometimes I think he's hilarious. Like, I think he's hilarious in Pop Star, and there's some moments where I'm like, I don't know, but I thought he was fantastic. I thought the chemistry between him and Christina was absolutely incredible.
It's so great.
I thought J.K. Simmons was fantastic. It was only about 90 minutes, if I remember right. Yeah. It's the first movie in a long time where, and I didn't, but the second it was over, there was a moment where I thought, like, I might watch it again. Like, I legit thought, like, I genuinely considered just starting it over from the top. I absolutely loved it. I've watched it since, because I watched it with Amanda. I love this movie. We talk about, warm blankets. Like, this was almost a warm blanket movie for me. Like, I feel like later, like, there's going to be moments where I like replay it this year, and it starts streaming on Hulu in a couple of weeks.
Cool.
For our audience, awesome. Sean, give the basic story about how this was purchased at Sundance, because it was like the most expensive purchase ever, right? I think it was. Didn't it beat The Birth of the Nation?
I think it's 17.5 million. It's not a huge sale. But still, at Sundance, that's a pretty big title for it.
That's the record, right? Isn't
purchase.
that the record for Sundance?
It was, yeah. But they've all kind of that record has changed like the last 4 years because it's an escalating game kind of thing. But it's and I'm not sure if it won the audience prize there or not. But you could totally see why it's Focus. Is it Focus Features that's bringing it to Hulu? I forget who's behind it. Focus was behind Irresistible, so maybe it's not them. No, it's not. But then the problem is, they bought these films at those early film festivals, Sundance being the only one that was able to go. And then the theatrical window completely got decimated because I think this movie could have done well. But the fact I love it's going to Hulu because people don't have to wait for it then.
And the search continues to find out who that is in Popstar.
What? You didn't ask Apatow?
I'm thinking about asking Andy Samberg tomorrow, but I wasn't sure. I feel like he's going to be like, oh, we're not telling you kind of thing. It's going to be like a wasted question.
It has to be
Apatow. He could be a tough... Maybe I'm the only one that feels this way. I feel like Andy Samberg's actually kind of a tough interview.
I've never had him before.
Like a lot of comedians can be hot and cold. And I feel like I'm such a massive Popstar fan. Like Lauren and I went front row to see Lonely Island perform the Popstar songs in Brooklyn last year. So it's a big deal for me. And I'm like still nervous about talking to him. But in a weird way, I would love to know if it's Apatow. For people who don't know what we're referring to, there's a scene in Popstar where somebody's private parts are being signed in a limo, and there's rumors that apparently it's Judd Apatow, but I just I don't buy that. There's no way it's Judd Apatow. There's no way. It's on screen for so long.
To answer your question, it's Neon is the company.
Oh, I thought you were going to answer the other question.
No, I don't know.
That's why I thought you were jumping in. I thought you knew.
I don't care if it's Neon. I want to know.
Yeah, I got to move past that, Gabe.
I don't know whose private set is sticking to the window.
When you guys came to visit for the ReelBlend DC show, and like my mom, my dad, Jake, and Gabe and Lauren and I all watched that scene at Popstar together, and I have probably seen that movie 15 times. I was crying. We were all crying. Like, it's just so funny. It's like my favorite. It's such a good scene. Please see the movie
too, because I wasn't invited to the screening.
It was a good time.
You were with your other boys.